Is it safe to store Bisquick in a Mylar bag with oxygen absorbers? Well, today we're going to answer that question. Hey Provident Preppers, today we want to answer a question that was posed by one of our viewers named Jim. I have a question regarding the possible long-term storage of the product Bisquick. Can it be stored long-term, and if so, about how long can it be stored in Mylar bags? In considering purchasing pancake mix through one of the food storage companies that says it is capable of a 30-year shelf life, it would appear that Bisquick, which has multiple food prep uses, would be a lot more economical, but only if it can be stored for a long period. Thank you. Great question, Jim. I'm so glad that you asked that. We've experimented a lot and learned a lot through that experimentation. And one thing that we've found is a product is limited by the shortest shelf life ingredient in it. So if you look at your ingredients, that will tell you a lot about whether or not you can store a product long-term. Now, quite frankly, this company that says that it's up to 30-year shelf life, that's what it is. It depends a lot on storage conditions. And we're not talking about up to a 30-year shelf life with the quality that you get when something is fresh, because it's not possible. We did a whole experiment on flour and the actual shelf life of flour. Click the card in the corner and you can go check out that video. It was really interesting because we compared new flour with some that was kind of old and some that was really old. And it was interesting because all the loaves of bread baked up to look very similar and they were beautiful. But the one with the oldest flour, like the kids said that it was edible, but they couldn't eat very much of it. It definitely had a smell and a taste that was not okay. So personally, I feel like flour has a 10-year shelf life and I wouldn't push it much past that. And so the main ingredient is enriched flour. So there you go. I don't think it stores more than 10 years, even though they're claiming that it will store up to 30. Now, we compared two different kinds of long-term pancake mix sold by food storage companies, and they had different ingredients in them. So even with that, look at the ingredients. Flour was the first ingredient. And like I said, I wouldn't do over 10 years, but the next one is the leavening agent that's in here. Some of the ones have baking soda, some have baking powder. What'll happen over time with the baking powder is it won't raise as well, right? But that's the whole reason why you have a leavening agent in there. We did an experiment with baking powder. We compared fresh to one that was 14 years old. The fresh one bubbled so well, and the other one, it was a dud. Like, it's not gonna make anything raise. So why have a product in here to store long-term if it's not going to do its job? Another thing that limits the shelf life is the fat. The trick to that is that if you have oxygen absorbers in there, it will slow down the chemical process that causes rancidity. So the oxygen absorbers are super important to make sure that that rancidity process is slowed down. The next thing about long-term food storage, flour will take on the taste of the can. It's kind of a really weird thing. So I personally don't store any flour products in a number 10 can, but the Mylar doesn't taste as bad. You still get a little bit of a weird taste, but for the most part, it's not like in a can. So I don't recommend storing it in a can. So let's get back to the original question. Will Bisquick last for 30 years if I put it in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber and store it in a cool, dry, dark place? Well, I don't think so. Would it be edible? Probably edible. Would it be quality? Absolutely not. And the way we determined that was by going through the list and finding out what is the ingredient with the shortest shelf life, and that's how you gauge it. So flour, about 10 years, baking soda, forever, or indefinite is the appropriate term. Cornstarch, indefinite. Monocalcium phosphate, about 2 years. Aluminum phosphate, 2 years. Dextrose, it depends on the kind of dextrose. So generally we're gonna say about 2 years. Vegetable oil, up to 2 years. So when we look at like the vegetable oil that I just bought, well, it's canola oil. And on here, the expiration date is June of 2025. Right now it's July of 2024, and I just purchased that. I should point out that the best if used by date is not an actual date that you can go by. It's as long as the manufacturer guarantees quality, and it's actually for the manufacturer convenience. Now, canola oil, if you store it in a hot garage, this could go rancid in half a year, 6 months. If you store it in a cool, dry, dark basement or in the refrigerator, you could get several years out of it. So storage conditions matter a lot. And the same thing with Betty Crocker on bettycrocker.com. When I researched how long they say that this can store, it's a year to 18 months. For any longer storage, it needs to be in the refrigerator or the freezer. We talked a little bit about how important the oxygen absorbers are. They reduce oxidation, which makes food go bad. But if there's no oxygen, you don't have any bugs and you don't have any, well, eventually food is still going to age, but it significantly slows down that aging process. This would be safe to use an oxygen absorber in because it has a really low moisture content. So you don't have to worry about botulism or something like that. There has been some issues with mold growing in pancake mixes. And so you just really need to be careful in what you're doing. So overall, can you do this? No. I think the best, if you want to store it right, which would be in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber in a cool, dry, dark location, the best you're going to get if you're pushing it is probably 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. But this is what I would do. Personally, I would buy the ingredients separately and I would store them separately. If you just Google copycat Bisquick recipe, you'll come up with several different Bisquick mix recipes that you could use. Like this one is from food.com, original Bisquick baking mix copycat. It has flour, baking powder, powdered sugar, salt, baking soda, and canola oil. That's really easy to just mix up, put in a container, and pull it out every time you want to use it and mix up a new batch every month or so. It's always fresh as long as you store those ingredients. And some of these ingredients will store for a fairly long time, but things like the canola oil, you can keep that rotated so it's always fresh. Now I should point out that in these recipes, you could usually substitute any kind of fat. Shortening is usually what would be used in Bisquick. So you could substitute something like coconut oil that stores forever, or whatever your favorite oil is, or butter. There's another one that I found online that was super, super simple. This one is from All Recipes. It's homemade Bisquick, and it only takes flour, baking powder, salt, and butter. And again, you can use any type of fat in place of the butter. So for me, I totally would just store these ingredients separately. That way I could use it in all kinds of different recipes, make that mix up, and use it as I need it. But you're right, Jim. It is a super versatile mix. When you look on the back of the box, there's all kinds of different things that you can make. But the secret is you don't have to have the mix to make all those same things. And now for the question of the day. What questions do you have about certain foods that you would like to store long term? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.